Hi everyone, I'm Daniele, a postdoc at Durham, where I fairly recently moved from my previous position in Edinburgh, and I am mainly interested in cosmology and galaxy formation. In this talk, I will highlight some results from my recent and ongoing projects on the impact of stellar and AGN feedback on the structure of halos and on the large-scale distribution of matter in the universe. These are indeed key questions for both galaxy formation and cosmology, as many observables, such as the halo mass function or dark matter density profile, rely on the properties of galaxies and their host halos. We have now a pretty good understanding of how dark matter halos grow in a given cosmology. So the challenge for a theory of galaxy formation in a cosmological context is more the astrophysical one of understanding the exact mechanisms that convert diffuse gas into stars within halos. While cosmological hydrodynamic simulations do an impressive job of matching a number of different observations, they often do so with different numerical prescriptions to model subgrid baryon-driven astrophysics such as stellar or AGN feedback. It is therefore crucial to investigate the predictions of different feedback models on the distribution of matter, and particularly gas, in the universe, and the subsequent implications for star formation. So, what do we mean with feedback in the first place? Let me make a brief historical digression here. It was clear very early on that the observed galaxy stellar mass function differed from theoretical expectations. The galaxy stellar mass function is essentially the number density of galaxies in a given logarithmic stellar mass bin. In this plot, you can see the blue line, which is a fit to observations of this quantity by Bell and others in 2003, whereas the dashed red line represents the predictions from the Millennium simulation, which is a large n-body cosmological simulations which was state-of-the-art at the time. So those predictions were given assuming that all halos contained the same cosmic baryon mass fraction, and that the stars were forming solely due to gas accretion and cooling. With these assumptions, however, as you can see, there is an overprediction of the galaxy stellar mass function both at the low and high mass end. Therefore, it was proposed that other mechanisms should act in order to suppress star formation at these two ends. And the general consensus nowadays is that stellar feedback is the most important one at the lower mass end, and AGN feedback at the higher mass end. So stellar and AGN feedback are sort of umbrella terms for a number of properties that range from stellar wind, supernova explosion, AGN jets, and so on and so forth, that manage to heat the surrounding gaseous medium and deplete halos with gas by pushing it away, and thereby suppressing further star formation. However, it would be a mistake to think that the only effect of feedback processes would be to slow down star formation. Indeed, there is a large body of literature, of which this slide represents a non-exhaustive list, on different quantities of interest for structure and galaxy formation history, ranging from the internal structure of halos, the properties of the circum and intergalactic media, and also large-scale structures such as the matter power spectrum or other observables. So how do we actually assess from a theoretical standpoint the effect of feedback on the quantities of interest? Well, the easiest way is to take a suite of hydrodynamic cosmological simulations that differ by the number of feedback processes that are implemented therein, and then compute the quantities of interest from all these different variants. So this is the context where my project lies. And however, rather than focusing on only one of the aspects of structure formation that are mentioned here, I tried to use a more holistic approach. In other words, I wanted to see whether we could make any broad brush conclusion on the relative strength of stellar and AGN feedback on different quantities of astrophysical and cosmological interest as a function of redshift that could be applicable on a wide range of scales. Specifically, I used the Simba suite of cosmological hydrodynamic simulations. I do not have enough time to go through all the details of the simulation. The reference, if you're interested in that, is Dave et al. 2019. But let me mention the most important aspects that will be more relevant for the remainder of this talk. Unlike other state-of-the-art cosmological simulations, Simba incorporates a dual model for black hole accretion, depending on the temperature of the accreting gas. Stellar feedback-driven winds follow the scaling relations of the FIA zoom-in simulations. AGN feedback is implemented with 3 modes, which are activated depending on the accretion rate and mass of the black hole. Fast accreting black holes follow the so-called AGN winds mode, whereby gas particles surrounding the black hole receive a perfectly bipolar kick along the direction of the angular momentum of the disk surrounding the black hole. And as black holes accrete more slowly in Eddington units, they gradually transition to the so-called AGN jets mode. Once again, this is a perfectly bipolar outflow, but in this case, the gas can reach higher speeds with a different scaling of the black hole properties compared with the AGN winds mode. Finally, for black holes where AGN jets are already active and reside in sufficiently low gas regions, there is also an X-ray heating mode, which includes volume heating of the gas within the kernel of the black hole. So, I used 5 different variants of the simulation, all with 50 megaparsec over H box size, all with the same resolution, and with the same initial conditions. They were only differing by the number of feedback prescriptions including in all these simulations. So I had one run with no feedback whatsoever, neither stellar nor AGN, one with stellar feedback only, one with stellar feedback plus AGN winds only, one with stellar feedback plus AGN winds and jets, and finally one incorporating all the modes together, which represented the fiducial run. So equipped with all these runs, I could then calculate different quantities of interest. And in this talk, I will focus on what I think are the most interesting results. But of course, if you're interested, you can find much more information in my paper. So first, I consider the evolution of the total Halo mass function and the baryonic Halo mass function in the fiducial simulation. In the plot on the right, I compared the actual baryon mass function, till lines, with the mass function that you would obtain by simply assuming that all halos contain the cosmic baryon mass fraction, the yellowish lines. Now, this approximation works well at redshift 4, but that clearly fails at lower redshift. So the question is, what feedback mechanism is dominant at what mass range and redshift? And here's the answer. In the upper panels, I'm showing the relative change of the total Halo mass function with respect to the fiducial run as a function of redshift. And in the lower panels, the relative change of the baryon mass function. So from the upper panels, we can see that all runs have a relative change around 25% maximum with respect to the fiducial one, up to 10 to the 13 solar masses or so. But for higher mass halos, this difference can reach even 50 or 75%. The relative change is much bigger when we consider the baryon mass function, though. And specifically, above redshift 2, we can see that the no feedback run overpredicts the baryon mass function. But as soon as we include just stellar feedback for the lower mass end, we can already reach the predictions that are given by the fiducial run. However, at lower redshift, for the higher mass end, that is not enough to suppress the baryonic mass function. Even if we include AGN winds, that's not enough. We really need to include the AGN jets. So this is a good starting point. but that tells us nothing about the distribution of baryons within halos themselves. So that's the question that I addressed next. I took halos in a certain mass range and then drew spheres of different radii around them so that I could obtain the median radial profile of the enclosed mass broken down by different baryonic phases. This is what you can see in the plot on the left, where the enclosed mass has been normalized by the value expected if the baryon mass fraction within the sphere is equal to the cosmic value. So as you can see, around R200, halos are baryon deficient. And this is a fairly well-known result that is seen also in observations. I'm thinking, for example, like the baryonic Tully-Fisher relationship. But interestingly, you need to draw a sphere as big of tens of virial radii, at least in this case, in order to encompass a baryon mass that reflects the cosmic baryon fraction. Surely feedback should push baryons outside halos. But what is the role played by each mechanism in this respect? To answer this question, I considered a threshold for the enclosed baryon mass fraction, here 90% of the cosmic value, and looked for the radius where such threshold is exceeded. And then I repeated the exercise for different halo mass beams and redshift and for all feedback variants. And the result is this plot on the right. So every line color refers to a different run, every line style to a different redshift. And you can see that in the case of the no feedback run, regardless of redshift and halo mass, all halos retain their cosmic share of baryons within the virial radius. Now, when you introduce stellar feedback, already at redshift 4, you need to walk away a few virial radii from the lower mass halos in order to reach the cosmic baryon mass fraction. But that is not enough for the higher mass halos, where not even AGN winds are enough to expel effectively the baryons from the halo. Those lines are not plotted here for clarity, but I verified that they would give you basically the same results as the stellar feedback run. When you do include at least jets, however, you see that you can eject effectively the baryons outside the halos also at the higher mass end. And in particular, by the time you reach redshift 0 for 10 to the 12.5 solar masses halos, you need to go away at even 10, 20 virial radii from the halo in order to achieve the cosmic baryon mass fraction. So I find these results quite interesting because in a way this scale can be used as a gauge for the strength of feedback in displacing baryons outside halos. And hopefully with future observations that should improve also our knowledge of the hot gas content of halos. I'm thinking, for example, about X-ray measurements such as with Athena in the future. We should be able, hopefully, to constrain simulations in this way. But this is, of course, at the moment, a very theoretical study, so we will need to verify that explicitly later. Now, as a follow-up to the previous work, I'm going to take this to the next level and looking at the gas density profiles in Simba in different halo masses, different runs, and different redshifts. So all the results that I'm showing from now on are to be considered preliminary. First of all, I verified that the gas density profiles in halos of Simba in the redshift range between 0 and 6 can all be very well approximated by a power law in the range between 5% the virial radius and the virial radius, so the outskirts of the halo, so to say. And then I looked at how the slope of this power law changes as a function of redshift for a fixed halo mass. In this plot here on the right, you can see the results for 10 to the 11 solar masses, and in this case, the slope doesn't vary significantly with redshift. The same is actually true even if you change the halo mass all the way up to 10 to the 13 solar masses. And above this threshold, there is a stronger redshift evolution. But in all cases, and also I verified for all runs, you can still fit the dependence of the slope on redshift for a fixed halo mass with a power law. So I proposed this fit for the slope of the gas density profile. And then I want to understand how these two fitting parameters vary with the halo mass. And that's what we can see in this slide. In the upper panel, you can see the variation of this eta naught parameter here, which by definition is the slope of the gas density profile when we are at redshift 0. And in the lower panel, there is this other parameter here that tells us about the redshift evolution. So the main take-home message for me from these plots is that above 10 to the 13 solar masses, there is a very distinct feature when we introduce at least AGN jets. Indeed, the gas density profiles seem to be less steep when we introduce jets, and also they vary more strongly with redshift. So again, this is a very theoretical study at the moment, but hopefully this could be something that can be tested with observations in the future. Once again, I'm working with a PhD student in Edinburgh, Fred Jennings, and we're trying to obtain data mocks for with Simba for future measurements with the Athena X-ray facilities, for example. So it would be really exciting if we could really tell apart these models with forthcoming observations. So now, the primary conclusions from my work are that the main mechanisms shaping the distribution of baryons in halos, at least according to Simba, are stellar feedback in lower mass halos before redshift 2 and AGN jets in higher mass halos after redshift 2. The impact of feedback on the halo mass function varies between 25 and 75% depending on the halo mass, and feedback strongly impacts the halocentric radius encompassing a baryon mass fraction equal to the cosmic value. As a preliminary result, AGN-driven jets are associated with less steep gas density profiles in group size halos. Thank you very much for listening.